In June of this year, Square Enix began to finally release more information about the long-awaited and much-delayed Final Fantasy VII Remake. Some cheered the redesigned battle system, some booed even attempting to have another go-around with such a classic. But there came a third, laughable position, one that seemed like a joke until sadly, inevitably, we realized it was not. Gamers, in this case almost entirely men, lamented the fact that fan-favorite character Tifa had ever so slightly smaller breasts than as depicted in the original Final Fantasy VII. It seemed, at first, like a tempest in a teapot, a smattering of tweets from disgruntled malcontents, a false controversy, an outrage where there is no real outrage. Sometimes an outrage can be manufactured from a few scant tweets. But the few tweets turned into hundreds and then thousands. It was trending worldwide, and YouTube is now full of videos about the topic, mostly condemning this breast reduction. Any hope that this would blow over in a day or two was dashed. Gaming YouTube pounced, crying censorship and the usual canards of feminists ruining gaming and the like. YouTube titles like Tifa censored and SJWs want Tifa's boobs smaller and so forth. This also spread to gaming news websites and think pieces examining every pixel of the virtual breasts. Many major gaming journalists spent many an article treating this as if it were news and treating the reaction as legitimate and not the whinging of crybabies. Twitter mocked said crybabies, claiming that they must not be aware that breasts are in no short supply on the internet, and that one need only spend 2 seconds on Google to find millions of pairs of breasts. What? We asked. Can you no longer masturbate to Tifa? This was not an isolated incident. Months prior, the cycle was very much the same for the latest Mortal Kombat game, in which some of the women were wearing somewhat more practical fighting gear, even though said skin-tight outfits still showcased their attractive bodies. The outfits simply didn't show enough cleavage for some longtime fans of Mortal Kombat who still remember Kitana and Melina's wardrobes from yesteryear, and even from more recent iterations. The same outrage occurred when Tomb Raider was rebooted and Lara Croft's ample chest size was not as ridiculously oversized as in some other games in the series. The wanker insults lobbed at those who participated in the outrage were funny for a moment until it became clear that this was never solely about breasts. Gamers already know that there is a nearly unlimited amount of fully naked breasts and other pornography for free on the internet. Telling them, "Don't you know about Pornhub?" is not helpful because they definitely already know and because that is not the root of this outrage. Simply wanting to see more breasts can't be the root due to the aforementioned bounty of pornography. We have to look deeper than this. This problem can never go away, can never even diminish until the men, and it is mostly men, who participate in the outrage address the roots of this pattern. A fear among those who have more institutional power in society about the possibility of a change in the status quo that they find comforting or even morally correct. Disclaimer. Some of this will seem entirely 101 to some, but because this is completely foreign to others, some basic definitions are necessary. Also, this will include talk of sexual assault, so bear that in mind before continuing. Institutional power is the authority wielded by entities such as governments and corporations. It can also be used to describe those who benefit from this authority contrasted with those who do not benefit from this authority. Institutional power exists where authority has been approved by a society and accepted as legitimate. The racial majority of a country, for example, wields institutional power that the racial minorities do not. The power that racism carries depends on how it is embedded in institutions, like law enforcement, and whether or not racist actions carry with them institutional support. Not only through the law, but through social governance and social norms that determine right and wrong for much of society. Even if racial minorities have advanced in a society on paper, they still typically lack institutional power to defend themselves. This happens through the law due to racialized poverty, making it difficult to defend oneself in court, but it also happens socially because often when a racial minority accuses either action or speech of being racist, they can be shouted down by far more people who will back them up. The rich have more institutional power than the poor. The rich can donate great sums of money to politicians to keep the laws in their favor, defend themselves effectively should they ever run afoul of the law, and so forth. One example that society tends to both understand and believe across political lines is this. Wealthy celebrities are rarely punished for their misdeeds. They have the money to defend themselves effectively, but they also have public support. No matter how awful the accusations, the celebrity's fan base will either assume their innocence and attack those who claim otherwise, or forgive them almost immediately, setting the stage for their comeback. No matter what they do, they tend to be able to bounce back from almost any controversy or even crime. They have the institutional support of being rich, as well as a society that values celebrities over non-celebrities. Politicians wield an incredible amount of institutional power, particularly when it comes to being able to defend themselves. In some countries, heads of state and heads of government are practically immune from prosecution. Sometimes this is codified in the law, and sometimes this is due to an unwillingness by their societies to prosecute. In short, some people in society have more institutional power than others. Sometimes this institutional power is explicitly the law, such as in the case with the president, and sometimes this institutional power is de facto in the law or governed socially. Women are significantly more vulnerable to sexual assault due to a society that places less value on the autonomy of women. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 1 in 71 men have been raped, whereas 1 in 5 women have been raped. That means there is approximately a 1.4% chance of a man being raped over the course of his life and a 20% chance of a woman being raped over the course of her life. Expanding to both rape and sexual assault shows us even more disparity. 91% of victims of rape or sexual assault are women, and only 9% of the victims are men. This, of course, does not lessen the pain of sexual assault for male victims. It merely shows a pattern. Laws, on paper at least, make it possible to prosecute the perpetrators of either crime, but as you can see by these statistics, there is more to disparity of how different people are treated than simply what the law says. Disparity of treatment is a consequence of how society views different people, not only officially through the law, but unofficially through social governance. Negative attitudes about women infect law enforcement and prosecution of these crimes. Women often report that law enforcement does not always take accusations of sexual assault seriously and sometimes even dismiss the accusation outright. Fear of how law enforcement will treat women who come forward with their assault, and societal reinforcement that women must see their bodies as shameful or sexual are two contributing factors to why sexual assault and rape are the least reported crimes. 63% of all sexual assaults are not reported to the police. Another way to put all of this is that women have less institutional power than men. There are other examples related to women and other examples of institutional power over others, but the sexual example is the most relevant for the topic today. Institutional power creates social norms, a broad set of ideals, both explicit and implicit, that dictate behavior in particular situations, as well as attitudes about different people and ideas. Social norms become institutionalized by a society, and these various social norms form a broader status quo, the existing state of affairs, particularly socially and politically. Deviation from a social norm can cause serious consequences to those who do, depending on how widely held the social norm or how strongly believed the social norm. Saying thank you is a social norm in many countries, and failure to do so generally results in little more than mild offense, or an accusation of rudeness. A social norm is not only tradition to some, it is morally correct. This can have adverse consequences. If the social norm is, women should take care of running their home and leave running the country up to men, or It is much better for everyone involved if the man is the achiever outside the home, and women take care of the home and family, then the social norms affect the perception of women's value in society, and where they exist on a kind of social hierarchy. Being devalued carries serious consequences. If someone is seen as less than in a society, and institutional power defends those who are seen as greater than, then the someone who is seen as less than is vulnerable both legally and socially. People internalize social norms at a young age, which means women appear to internalize social norms like when to have children, what tasks are appropriate for women in the workforce, how much society values the work of women, what women are supposed to look like, how women are supposed to behave compared to men, etc. Over time, society fights against social norms that they see as negative and try to upend the status quo to something comparatively more progressive or egalitarian. When this happens, there is always an effort by those with more institutional power to turn back the clock. This attempt at reversal is called reactionary politics. A reactionary is a person or entity that favors a return to a previous status quo. When gamers say that feminism has ruined video games, or other outlandish statements that do not actually reflect reality, this is a reactionary movement. Not only reactionary as it relates to video games, but reactionary because the mild changes in the video game landscape, to them, reflect mild changes in the status quo and a threat to their unequal institutional power. Social norms can be influenced by a great many factors, and one of those factors is popular media. Square Enix is not woke because its new Tifa design went from a double D to a regular D. In fact, Square Enix is probably very happy that reactionary gamers have given Final Fantasy even more coverage. I'm not here to defend Square Enix, only to explain the reactionary politics element of all of this. Square Enix is not your friend, and it has contributed to reinforcing sexual objectification far more than it has fought against it. Objectification theory states that many women are sexually objectified and treated as objects to be valued for use by others. Sexual objectification occurs when a woman's body or body parts are singled out and separated from her as a person, and she is viewed primarily as a physical object of sexual desire. Sexual objectification of women contributes to mental health problems that disproportionately affect women, like eating disorders. This can occur one of two ways. The first is direct, and involves experiences of being sexually objectified in public. The second is indirect, and involves internalization of sexual objectification. Media allows sexual objectification to be broadcast and even played worldwide. All forms of media have sexually objectified women in some cases, but video games have proven unique in that gamers are able to more actively participate in the sexual objectification, creating a confluence of both direct and indirect objectification. Video games do not turn an innocent child into a school shooter. This is well understood. But all media influences how we see the world and colors our perceptions of people. Media can reinforce pre-existing social norms. Due to gaming's incredible international popularity, it has greater capacity to do this than many other forms of media. The consequences of sexual objectification are well documented. Internalized objectification can increase women's anxiety about their own physical appearance, reduce opportunities for peak motivational states or flow, diminish awareness of internal bodily sensations such as hunger, sexual arousal, and stomach contractions, increase body shame, increase anxiety about physical safety such as fears of sexual assault, which in turn can lead to depression. Video game designers have not done much to course correct, but there has been a mild amount of effort. The problem is that when this mild amount of effort appears, reactionaries become upset and demand a return to the previous status quo. The outrage over the mildest, and I do mean mildest, diminishing of breasts isn't about breasts. There is never going to be a drought of breasts. The mild diminishing of breasts to these reactionaries is a signal of losing control over the autonomy of women, representative of mild gains in society and mild changes in social norms. These mild gains don't actually threaten to harm anyone, but do threaten a traditionalist status quo that some find comforting. Reactionaries believe that they are in the moral right by preserving a status quo that feels correct to them. They want to be socially and morally correct, and by enforcing depictions of women, even virtual women, they can achieve this. A lot of misogynistic behavior is directed toward women who violate social norms and expectations, or who aren't serving male interests in the ways in which they are expected by the status quo. If men, for example, believe expectations of women are to be attractive to them, then any deviation feels like a violation of what they perceive as the correct, morally upright status quo. If the status quo is violated, even by something as simple as slightly smaller breasts in a video game, this is seen as morally incorrect. Reactionary gamers are not angry that they can't as effectively masturbate to a Final Fantasy character, as comical as that might be. The status quo of men having greater roles in the hierarchy has advantaged themselves for a long time. Their anecdotal experience of the status quo is that of it being correct because anecdotal experiences only tells them how social norms affect themselves. They have been unfairly advantaged, but all they see is social norm equals good for me equals good for everyone. It's all they need to dismiss the experiences of others. Reactionaries don't frame their beliefs this way, and instead frame them through a smokescreen of seemingly more reasonable arguments that they either know are false and are therefore arguing in bad faith, or mistakenly believe as their true reason for their reactionary politics. One argument that they make is that when a character in a video game is a woman, or a person of color, or not straight, the studio is doing this purely for marketing reasons or political reasons, and not for artistic reasons. This ignores the fact that making their character a man, or white, or straight is also a product of marketing or politics. Reactionaries often display an argument that amounts to this. There is man, and there is political. There is white, and there is political. There is straight, and there is political. This is a product of entrenched belief in the status quo in which white, straight men are a default, or normal, and that any deviation that is chosen is therefore suspicious. The argument that a slight diminishing of breasts and other small changes to the aesthetic of a video game are insidious specifically because they are corporate decisions ignores the fact that previous decisions that made the breasts larger were also corporate decisions. At best, it cancels out this argument, and at worst, it reveals that the argument is probably being made in bad faith. Reactionaries who denounce these aesthetic changes purely on the basis that they are based in marketing look the other way when marketing benefits themselves. It's only bad if it's not for themselves. The other smokescreen argument is a cry of censorship. Censorship is the suppression of an idea or image by a force more powerful than its target. If a company creates a video game character design, a more powerful entity than said company is not manipulating them to do so. There is no cabal of super billion-dollar companies secretly forcing regular billion-dollar companies to treat portrayals of women with respect. The state is also not forcing these portrayals. Any artistic or marketing decision removes from existence some version that would otherwise have existed, but that would also be true if the artists who made these decisions chose to portray women as sex objects. Portraying women as sex objects also removes from existence some version that would otherwise have existed, in this case women portrayed not as sex objects. One might argue that there is still a whiff of censorship if the decision is political, but as previously mentioned, it would be just as political if the artist chose to portray a woman as a sex object. A social norm is not apolitical simply because it is a social norm. It only feels that way due to your own familiarity with it. A video game company designing a woman character has no unbalanced power dynamic because the decisions begin and end within the company. In order for it to be censorship, you have to ask, who is censoring square-enix? Who is more powerful than square-enix? The examples that reactionaries give are SJWs on YouTube, but they're not more powerful than Square-Enix. Square-Enix may have taken suggestions from media critics, but a suggestion is not mandatory, and censorship is suppression and therefore mandatory, it shows a complete misunderstanding about institutional power in our society, particularly as it relates to capital. So, let's sum up. The outrage is about control of the depictions of women. The outrage is about the reactionaries' vision of what they want to be the status quo. It cannot simply be about wanting to see breasts, because there is no shortage of breasts, and there never will be. And it cannot be about censorship in the abstract, as no corporation is being forced or coerced by powers greater than themselves on how to design their women characters. It's a classic culture war. Simply put, the pattern of outrage has its roots in reactionary politics and a mistaken belief that a status quo that only benefits some is beneficial to all. Thanks for listening.